Come one and come all to the Saints Insider podcast for some undetermined summer day. We're recording a couple early summer vacation months, so we'll release these sometime in the middle of July. Hope your day is going well. Hope it's not too hot. Hope the hurricanes stay away. And
God, I really hope that doesn't age poorly, man.
Maybe we should start over. No, we're actually recording these. We're going to record a couple of episodes here. It's July the 5th. It's the day after the 4th of July. Matthew Paris, Luke Johnson, Jeff Duncan. I'm Zach Ewing. And I'm just going to we're all taking a little bit of time off over the next few weeks as we get set for Saints training camp. And so keep the content flowing and keep your appetite whetted for Saints season. So here we are. Today we're going to talk, I think, a fun topic. It's about expectations externally for the Saints. It's actually probably not a fun topic for the Saints because the expectations, they're very low. And we'll talk about some various power rankings and whether that's appropriate or whether the Saints are being underrated in 2024. And we will get going right after this.
Football fans, with the Caesars Sportsbook app, you can be in the game all the time. Seeking instant action? Quick Picks offers you the most popular games and markets already built for you and ready to bet. Experience the thrill when you stack your bets to create a super parlay. Build bets for your favorite teams and players across multiple games. This season, don't just watch the game. Download Caesars Sportsbook and experience the game like never before.
And you are listening to the Saints Insider Podcast, a pre-recorded version here for the month of July. And we're talking today about Saints expectations heading into 2024. Reminder to subscribe to the Saints on NOLA.com YouTube channel. Leave us a positive review if you like the show, and tell your friends about it. Share around. Get those subscriber numbers up. We appreciate all of that. Guys, today, this was, I think, a topic you came up with, Matt. And it came up most recently, and we'll talk specifically about this, but ESPN did a ranking of all 32 rosters based on players aged 25 and younger. And the Saints rated out very poorly in that. We'll tell you in a few minutes just how poorly. But I started to go back and look at other power rankings. NFL.com, I think Fox Sports had one, CBS Sports, PFF, Pro Football Talk, Sharp Football. I can't remember all the ones I looked at. I didn't find a single one in which the Saints ranked higher than 24th. And they ranked as low as 27th in the NFL. So we're talking about expectations that are just at the bottom floor for a team that thinks it could be pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's where the franchise has kind of found itself the last couple of years. Ever since Drew Brees retired and Sean Payton has left, they've kind of just slowly been losing that national relevance. That doesn't mean fans aren't as excited about the team. Oh, we can debate that. Maybe they aren't. But there's just not that, like, national buzz. Now, there's still some primetime games next season. Again, Sean Payton is the most obvious one. But there's just not that, like, you're not going to see them higher in rankings, I think, because when teams think of the Saints, they now think of that 7 to 9 win range. And, you know, that may be good enough to win the NFC South, but when doing power rankings league-wide, are they really better than, I don't know, a team that has more hype than, like, the New York Jets, you know, with Aaron Rodgers? They're just they're not really kind of in the mix for those spots. But, I mean, what this upcoming season is maybe they can prove some people wrong.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about whether we think they can do that. But, Luke, it's one thing to be ranked 27th in a set of power rankings when you're clearly in rebuild mode, when you know you just got a high draft pick. Maybe you're going to get another one. You're kind of clearing the books on salary. That's not the Saints. The Saints expect to compete, and that's what's kind of so striking about this.
Yeah, and that's why, like, I kind of, it's, you know, as somebody who's just around the team a lot, I just, like, I kind of find these a little surprising. I mean, I think Matt's point is spot on. And just about their kind of national profile has really dimmed considerably the last couple of years. But, you know, when I look at the Saints team, I see a team that is kind of stuck in the middle, which is actually the worst place to be. You know, if you're just kind of barely competing or kind of barely in the mix in, you know, week 17, week 18, which is what this team has been the last 3 years, that's not a good place to be. Because you don't have a realistic shot at competing for the title. You don't have a realistic shot of getting a quick turnaround done. You know, you're just kind of stuck there, and that's where I still think they are. I think that's actually where if this is the case and they are one of the 6-7 worst teams in the NFL this year, I mean maybe that would actually be a good thing in the long term for this team. I just don't think it's true. I think you're right about just people kind of overlooking them and not thinking they're any good at all. But I think it's way more realistic. They're kind of closer to the 500 range this year, and are once again kind of in the mix late in the year, but really don't have enough juice to get it done at the end of the year. And if they're able to surpass that, that's even better to me than bottoming out and figuring out a rebuild.
Yeah.
Because I think that's more in line with what the Saints want. I just don't know if they're there.
Off-season hype is probably what a lot of these things are based on, and the Saints just don't have any of it, Jeff. I mean, that's really what if you're outside looking at, if you're sitting in Chicago or New York or LA and looking at all 32 rosters and trying to put together power rankings, what do the Saints have that? Oh yeah, I'm going to bump them up. I mean, they just don't. That's what they're missing.
Yeah, because they haven't really had a lot of high draft picks. The sexy quarterback that might bolt up, the Chicago Bears, for instance.
Or like C.J. Stroud last year.
Right.
A lot of people thought the Houston Texans were going to be one of the worst teams in the NFL last year. They were in this bottom 7-8 range in a lot of these preseason power rankings last year, and C.J. Stroud was amazing, and they ended up being a playoff team.
Yeah, and it happens every year, and it's happened to the Saints. So I think if you're a Saints fan, you should, understand that this team has been counted out a bunch of times. 2006 is a good example. Coming off 3-13 year, no one thought they were going to win the division and go to the NFC Championship game, and they did it. Now they brought in Drew Brees. Obviously, that was a huge thing, and Sean Payton. But they also, I can distinctly remember in 2009, they were coming off 8-8 and 7-9 seasons, and expectations were really low, and they won the Super Bowl. So it can happen, and it does every year in this league. We see it. Houston Texans, a great example. And I, for one, think this isn't such a bad thing for the team. I think in some ways they're kind of relishing the underdog role. They've always had expectations, and now they don't. And so their mantra this offseason has been, hey, let's just put our heads down, go to work, chop wood, if you will. But that's not a bad thing because they've always been the kind of hunted in this division, even the last couple of years. I think most people thought they'd win the division. No one's got them really picked to win the division this year, and I think that might work to their advantage.
I agree.
So one of the more concerning things, I guess, and we've talked about this in previous episodes, but this ESPN list of talent rankings under 25. I think what they called it, their under 25 talent rankings. Basically looking at players under the age of 25, ranking all 32 rosters based just on that. And we've talked, this is where the concern is for me, is where is it going to get better? Chris Olave is really the only name player they have right now who's under the age of 25. Not Eric McCoy, who, congratulations, first child yesterday.
I think their child was born yesterday, but they might have
4th
just
of July,
posted
maybe.
yesterday.
Yeah, maybe they just posted it. But they had Eric McCoy and a few other players kind of turn 26, and so they're not on that list anymore. But Matt, that's sort of where they were ranked 30th in this thing of talent under age 25. They just don't have anything that gives you a lot of hope for the future at this moment.
Yeah, just a lot of unproven. Like you look at their 23 draft class, there weren't a lot of contributors outside of Jordan Howden, Brian Brzee, who was kind of like an honorable mention. But, a guy like Nick Saldiveri, who they're counting to be their left guard, barely played last year. Isaiah Foskey played 83 snaps, their second-round pick. So it's not and I think it's too soon for this year's draft class to maybe be counted in some of those lists, or it's hard to project kind of the overall strength of this class just yet. So when we did this pod, last month of, guys that
drafting guys for the next 4 years.
Yeah,
right?
and it felt like there was a pretty quick drop off. And I think I had the first pick in that, and I picked Olave, and then I don't even remember who the second pick was.
It was Eric McCoy.
Yeah, so it's. I understand, I understand where the Saints ranked on that list, and I don't know necessarily if I disagree with where they're ranking in. That doesn't mean. I guess for me, thinking about the Saints, it's how much can their veterans continue to produce at this level, and how is that going to contribute to a drop off or not? And I think they'll at least still perform at a good enough level to where they compete for the division next year. So,
well, this is going to be a big year for that 25 and under group.
Yeah,
because they've kind of just been blocked for playing time. A lot of them have, or they've dealt with injuries or whatever the case is. But like we've discussed, I mean, last week and a bunch. I mean, we all think Kendry Miller is going to have a bigger role in this team. You know, I mean, they have Chase Young this year. He's 25 years old. You know, I think Cesar Ruiz is still 25. Yeah, Alante Taylor is 25. Yeah, this 23 draft class, I think you can see at least two of those guys playing significant roles in the team. I think you can see Jordan Howden stepping up into a bigger role. I think there's actually a path for these guys to contribute now, which is their ranking right now is fair because they just haven't saw the field very much. And some of their more high-profile draft picks, like Trevor Penning, have not panned out, or Peyton Turner. But like those guys are going to get more of an opportunity this year. I think you could see those rankings go up. I don't know if they're going to go up like top 10 because they don't have any like true impact players outside of proven impact players outside of Chris Olave and maybe Brian Brzee. But this is those guys are going to be really important to this team both this year and in the next couple of years.
And I think what you have to hope for is that Clint Kubiak and this offensive staff gets more out of the talent that's there. I mean, that's always a factor. I can still remember in 2000 when Jim Haslett and the staff came in, the Mike Ditka years were so bad, everybody thought the Saints were awful. And he was like, we looked at it like there's a lot of, they had good offensive and defensive lines. That's the one thing that Ditka did. And so a guy like Leroy Glover that's overlooked in his first year gets 17 and a half sacks and is like the runner-up for Defensive Player of the Year because a better defensive staff coached him. So you can maybe see a leap from some of these young guys that we haven't seen just because they haven't been utilized properly. That would be the hope, I think, especially on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah. I mean, I think so much of this season is riding on Clint Kubiak and what he's able to get, and those new offensive coaches and what they're able to get out of these guys.
No pressure.
No pressure.
Lots of pressure. But I mean, seriously, that's if they're counting on younger guys who nationally have no reputation, no one's heard of them outside of, I remember that name from that year's draft. Like, they're going to have to prove it for the Saints to move up in any sort of national consciousness.
Yeah. And I think it falls squarely on we talked about it on the pod last week. I mean, this draft class and last year's, I mean, they at least have to get production out of these guys, like Matt was saying, Saldivari and some of these guys that haven't played. And I think they're confident they will.
Okay, so we kind of described some of the reasons why maybe the Saints are ranked lower. Now, let's try to answer the question is, do we agree with it? This is sort of our New Orleans versus everybody segment. 24th, 25th, 27th in these various power rankings. Jeff, first of all, when was the last time the Saints would have been in the bottom quartile of the league preseason power rankings? I mean, I think it's got to have been close to 20 years.
Yeah, well, I can't remember, to be honest with you, what they were like in those 7 and 9 seasons under Peyton, because they were
like the 14, 15,
16.
But I don't think they would have been like 25th
I don't
preseason.
think so either. But
no, I mean,
they were pretty bad defensively, though. I mean, historically bad. But
historically bad.
But I don't know if they were. Because Breeze was here,
alone would
they
have
probably never got down that low. Yeah, I can't remember them being this low. I mean, I always use as a gauge a little bit, kind of going back to Matt's point about on the profile. I mean, there's been no like national media coming in. And usually the offseason, the national media is going to make a tour around the camps. I can't think of anyone that's been in to the Saints this offseason.
No, not yet.
Even in the offseason. But there's not a real great storyline here either. Like I said, there's no rookie star. Clint Kubiak's pretty media shy for the most part. There's no great storyline here to attract people. Yeah. So it doesn't surprise me, but I think it would probably be 2000, when coming off the Ditka years, because things were so bad. The clown show of trading your whole draft to get Ricky Williams and Danny Werfel as your starting quarterback. I mean, they were seen as a totally dysfunctional organization back then. And it's pretty much been opposite of that since then. The Katrina year in 2005, but that was an outlier.
Yeah, now we're starting to see it slip the other way. And like, the other thing is, and you made this point earlier, Dunk, like one of those bottom 8 teams or so most years makes the playoffs. Like, I didn't go back and look and make a record of it, but I would just, like, the Texans were the team last year. 2 years ago might have been like the New York Giants made the playoffs as like a bottom 8 team. This happens every year, Matt. Like, you do see a team pop up and do that. Could that be the Saints this year?
Yeah, it just depends on how the division shakes out. Like, let's say Kirk Cousins gets hurt again or isn't where he needs to be, and Michael Penix is, maybe he's not as ready as the Falcons think, and so the Falcons take a step back. The Buccaneers don't, they regress with Baker Mayfield. Like, I think there are circumstances within the division that the Saints could maybe take a big leap forward, but I'd actually be interested in looking, and I probably should have done this before we started recording, but I think, I wonder where the rest of the NFC South teams are mostly ranked in these power rankings, because I just think this division as a whole is pretty overlooked or pretty regarded as one of the worst divisions in the NFL. Honestly, it reminds me of the NFC East. I thought you were ringing the bell.
I was going to ask about covering teams with low expectations and ring the bell.
Yeah, so I feel like I've had this conversation every year as it relates to Washington. But like a few years ago, the NFC East, Washington won it in 2020 at 7-9, and people just thought that division was a joke. But I think it was 2022. They were maybe a game 2 or off the best combined winning percentage of all time for the
3
division.
playoff teams in 22,
Yeah.
right?
And so,
the Giants and the Cowboys and the Eagles.
And so it can turn around pretty quickly, but I don't think you would have predicted that at the start of the year. So it just really kind of depends on how these games shake out. But right now, I think the NFC South really kind of lacks a lot of star power or luster outside of maybe the Kirk Cousins edition, and that's why I think part of the reason the Saints are overlooked.
It's like the general consensus around the NFL is just that the NFC South is bad.
Yeah,
and
it kind of is.
I mean, the last 2, it's been 9-7 the division title winner, or 9-8 the last 2 years. No, that's
the Bucs were even 8-9.
I think the Bucs were 8-9. Yeah. So 9-8 and 8-9 the last 2 years. So I get it.
Yeah.
Totally get it. But I also think that just to expect that to continue is, the NFL has so much variance over a year to year. I think somebody's going to be much better in the NFC South this year. I don't know who it's going to be, but I think somebody's going to actually be a competitive team within this division this year.
Yeah. To answer your question, Matt, in these various power rankings, the Falcons were consistently ranked the best. And I think they're the team that has a chance to pop off and win 11 games this year out of all of them. I mean, because of the Cousins addition, you kind of like the pieces they had in place. Lost a lot of close games last year that can turn around, as we know. They were kind of in that 13 to 16 range. The Panthers were consistently below the Saints, of course, being the worst team in football last year. And then it was the Bucs, the team you see in these, I think it was 6 power rankings I found between the draft and now. They were all over the place. I mean, you could find them up with the Falcons. You could find them down with the Saints. I think no one's quite sure what to make of the Bucs. But Dunk, if the Saints can control their division, go 4-2, maybe even 5-1 against the division, then there's a chance. I mean, they have enough other winnable games. Nobody expects Denver to be that good. They play Washington. They play the Giants. I mean, they have enough other games where you're going, boy, if you could pick off 4 or 5 division games, you do see a path to be much, much better than what's being projected.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't think it's outlandish to think they can do it. I just think there's a lot of things that have to fall into place. It feels like there's 2 things the Saints are counting on, and Matt alluded to one of them earlier. I mean, some of their best players and strongest leaders are all in their 30s, right? Demario Davis, Cam Jordan, Ty Matthew,
deep into their
Taysom
30s.
Hill.
Yeah.
They're counting on those guys continuing to perform at a high level, and then we're counting on some unproven commodities to step forward. And so there's a lot of ifs there. And I think historically you'd say they're going to drop off in their 30s, and some of these guys aren't going to pan out. So that's why I think there's just so many question marks. Nationally, people are doubting, rightfully so, but it happens all the time. Players step forward. The Texans are a great example. And I think in this division especially, there's an opportunity because some of these other teams have the same amount of question marks. But I do think, I know we talk about this, I can almost feel like I can see what this Saints season's going to start like. I mean, it's just so front-loaded in the schedule. How they can get through and navigate that early part of the schedule and keep confidence up in the locker room after what's happened the last 2 years. To me, that's why when we talked earlier about the importance, I think Dennis Allen and his ability of the staff and the team leaders to keep the ship afloat if they start 1-4 is going to be huge, because I don't know if they can do better than 2-3. I'm just being realistic.
Well, that's been the pattern of Dennis Allen the first 2 seasons is they've started slow and they've kind of rallied to finish. Like, it's,
Well, they were 2-0 last year.
Weird to say
2-0, yes.
They were a
2-0,
quarter
but-
away from being 3-0 last year, and then it all went south quickly.
sorry.
Yeah, you weren't
Yeah,
here yet.
But still, I mean, the
you're
point
making a
remains
point.
though. They've had to close both seasons under his leadership with a flurry to even be relevant in Week 18.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the last talking point we had here is like, how do they change this reputation? And they're going to have a chance to do it. I mean, they open with Carolina. We talk about how important it is to win that game. I think Carolina, just almost by default, will be better than they were last year.
I think they're going to be the worst team in the league.
I mean, they might be, but they still might be better and still be the worst.
I looked at
straight
their
number
roster
one
the other
picks.
day. I'm like,
They were the worst team in the league
what were
by
they
a
thinking? Letting
good margin.
Frankie Louvu go and like some of these young
do
guys
what?
I don't understand what they were doing.
So the Saints point is the Saints will not be changing any opinions that first week. You better be, unless they lose to Carolina. But they will have a chance after that. I mean, you're going to go to Dallas. You got Philly coming in here. You're going to go to Kansas City in Week 5. You play a couple division teams. Atlanta, who's the favorite in the division. I mean, they're going to have a chance, Luke, to all of a sudden, if they could go 3-2 over those first 5 games, you're going to see these power rankings everybody does every week. They're going to be, up 10 or more spots.
Yeah, absolutely. If they're competitive within that stretch, they're going to change a lot of people's opinions of them. And I think that's why so much of this is riding on Kubiak. Yeah, I mean, if they win those games, I mean, let's just some of these teams they're going up against have high-powered offenses. They're going to have to score points. I don't think they're going to be winning games like they did in 2018, 2019 sometimes, where they're holding teams to, or 2021 even, when they're holding teams to 12 points in a game and winning on 5 field goals. They're going to have to score points. And I think that, when you're looking at this team and the big difference this year compared to the first 2 years of Dennis Allen's tenure is the big sweeping changes on offense. And they're going to look different. They're going to feel different. And I think that to me is the most important. They got to get off to a quick start, which is hard to do when you're operating a new scheme. But if they can do that, then yes, they're gonna vastly change the opinion of them around the league.
I think the other thing we haven't touched on too, and I think it plays into the overall ranking, is I don't know if Derek Carr is as highly regarded nationally as certainly the Saints view him, but also if you were to ask people, all right, rank the 32 QBs, where would Derek Carr land? I feel like he'd probably be ranking in the 24 range among that same national group. So I don't know if it's that simple. All right, you guys have the 24th best quarterback, you're 24. But to Jeff's point earlier of during those 7 and 9 seasons, you couldn't really rank Drew Brees and co. that low because they had Drew Brees. I think maybe some people are more comfortable ranking the Saints in the low 20s because of Derek Carr. And I think he's probably a better quarterback than that. But I mean, I feel like half my Twitter feed is just Josh Dubno.
Here's the thing, and that's a great point. I did see a set of quarterback power rankings. I can't remember where they were from, but Carr was 23rd or something. I mean, he was not quite as low as the Saints are as a team, but he was in the 20s. And this particular set of rankings I looked at had 4 rookie quarterbacks ranked ahead of him.
Yeah,
and I feel like if you're even as a top 10 pick, if your rookie season is as good as a typical Derek Carr season, the team that drafted you is going to be pretty dang happy with that. I mean, statistically, he's had good seasons.
I would say he's more mid-pack.
Yeah.
I think he's
I'd say
squarely in the middle, right?
14 to 16.
Yeah, he's
Somewhere
right,
there.
in the middle. I mean, I think we know what he is, and I don't think he has to be like Drew Brees. He just has to be a mid-level quarterback with this defense, and if they can get more juice out of their offense, that should be good enough in this division.
Yeah, I think the one caveat I would add to that is that he's got to play more consistently. which is something that he's struggled with throughout his career. Yeah, and Zach, you've brought this up before. His highs are very, very high, and his lows are really, really low. And they need him to be closer to the high more frequently. You can't have a whole lot of games where he's just a non-factor in the game or a negative factor in the game.
I go back to that game in Atlanta last year where he throws the pick six. Jesse Bates reads him, and that changed that game. That was, I mean, the game basically was almost over once that happened. The momentum switch, and that was all on Carr. That wasn't on anybody else. And he made these excuses afterwards about how like that safety never makes that play and everything. And that's just not good enough. The excuse wasn't good enough. I think the guys in the locker room see that, and that's something like Drew Brees would have never done. He'd have been like, "That's on me. I can't let that happen." And I just think that's the missing piece I see with Carr. Can he get past it? I don't know. That kind of just devastating mistake that turns games around, and then owning it, I think, is the other thing I see that's kind of missing with him sometimes.
I mean, Derek Carr's got a little Dave Kingman in him, or what's a more modern example, like Giancarlo Stanton. Like he'll make some plays where you're going, holy smokes, did you see that? And especially in his Raiders days, had some spectacular comebacks. And then he'll have other plays like you're talking about where you're just scratching your head going, how is this guy even in the NFL?
And I think his teammates do that too. And I think that's the devastating part.
It's Bill Simmons calls it the 90-10 rule, where 90% is if you're fine, but the 10 is just so glaring that it's hard to ignore.
Yeah. So that's where we're at. I think we kind of come to a consensus here, and we'll end on this. I think the average, there was it was like a Colts site, USA Today Colts site or something, put together the composite of all these rankings, and the Saints were 25th in the composite. I think our consensus is they're higher than that. Without having done a ton of research on the rest of the NFL, so this is very unscientific. But Matt, where do you rank the Saints? Pick a number where you'd put them in the power rankings.
Randomly, like 18, 19.
All right.
That's exactly what I was going to say, which is like kind of aligning with where they've been, right? They had the 12th pick in the draft this year, right? Am I remembering that right, or 14th?
14th.
Yeah.
But those there were like tiebreakers involved. I mean, they were right
exactly,
there.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like they're still a middle of the pack team, but I don't think they're bottom 8.
Jeff?
I think they're a middle of the pack team, and I think I'd rank them at like 27th or 8th.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I think the wheels could come off this year, but I also think, like I said, there's a high degree of uncertainty here. Cone of uncertainty is wide. I think they could put it all together and be in the playoffs. But if I had to guess,
just picking 27th or 28th.
I think. Look, I watched these documentary series with the Carolina Panthers. They all think they're going to be. I mean, you should watch it. I mean, every one of them in the building thinks they're going to be good. I talked to Sean Payton a couple weeks ago. He thinks they're going to be really good. Ask anybody about Denver around the league. They all think they're going to be terrible. He thinks they're going to be really good. So, I mean, I just think that's what goes on at this time of year. In every team, Arizona, I mean, I actually think you could look at Arizona and find more reasons to think they could make a leap. You know, they got Marvin Harrison Jr., they got all these high draft picks.
Arizona was fun last year, even though they were bad.
Yeah, I mean, they're the kind of team I think could make a leap, and no one sees them, but they had the number one pick in the draft at quarterback. So I don't see any of that with the Saints. Like, I don't see Marvin Harrison Jr. If Marvin Harrison Jr. were here, people would be throwing parades and stuff. Like there's none of that. I just feel like this thing is very precarious.
Yeah, I think that's a good word for it. And honestly, like, for those who look at this and go, how could they be 27th? Like, how is that even possible? Go make your own power ranking. Seriously, it's hard. Somebody's got to be 32. Somebody else has to be 31. Somebody else has to be 30.
Does somebody have to be 29?
And yes, they do.
I know who's number one, though.
And you just, at some point, you run out of teams you know are going to be bad, and then you have to pick somebody else to be 27th, and sometimes it's like, hey, the Saints aren't anything special. Maybe they're 27th. Like, I think that's the thought process here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess. I just still think that they scream middle of the pack team to me.
And look, the difference between, in this league, 27 and 28 and 15 is not much.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, it's a couple injuries. I remember, I sound like the old man here, which I guess I am, right?
Yeah, I mean, like,
You know,
we need to start ringing the bell every time you start referencing the 2000 Saints.
yeah.
But.
So, no, but like, I remember this is before 2000 Saints. I'm going back to when I covered the Titans. They had a center named Mark Stepnoski. And I was figuring out the league, you know, didn't know what I was doing. I'd been covering the SEC my whole career. And he goes, look, dude, let me just tell you, there's 3 things that matter between these teams: injuries, breaks, and schedules. And it was so true. Like, just the bounce of the ball, you get bad luck on that when you're injured. And then when you play teams, we've talked about that a bunch. Like, when you catch a team on the schedule matters. And so I think, like, the variance can be 4 wins maybe between those 3 things.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at last year, and you could do this with any team, but if Blake Grupe makes a field goal in Green Bay, Foster Moreau catches a ball at the end of the game against Jacksonville, and Carr doesn't throw that pick 6 in Atlanta, we're having a totally different conversation this entire offseason.
Kind of.
I mean,
You know.
yeah. Or
Because what would they be, 11-6 of that? No, they'd be 12-5 if you give them 3 more wins.
I know,
Yeah,
but
though,
the
you
league-
could also point to
Yes,
other
you could.
games if they don't come back
course you
against the
could.
Colts, if the Bears
Yeah.
don't like melt down with Tyson Bagent, like
Of course you could, and that's sort of the point. That's the point, is that they could have been anywhere from top 8 in the league to bottom 8 in the league
Yes.
last year, just because they're middle of the pack.
And I think another thing too to consider is, because I've had this conversation a lot with Washington, I feel like, okay, it's not sure. Hit the bell. Like, I would have said like, oh yeah, they're a 9-win team or like a 7-win team, and then they finish with like 4 or 7. You know, it's you can talk yourself into the team you're covering a lot, at least in my experience, you can, and then they just end up being like very blah. So
yeah, well, it's the only thing you're.
you're around it too much, kind of.
Right.
In the
we're-
weeds.
We're in. We've got Saint Stockholm syndrome.
Optimistic training
Can't see the
activities.
forest for the trees,
Yeah.
man. We're
Yeah. All right. So that's the view how we see it. I mean, I guess at least we're self-aware. but that's our pod on national perception of the Saints going into the 2024 season. We appreciate you joining us. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the like button. Leave a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And we will see you next time here on the Saints Insider Podcast. It's Matthew Paris, Luke Johnson, Jeff Duncan, Norman Bell's our producer. I'm Zach Ewing, and we'll see you next time.